Hi, how's it going? Welcome to Code with Z. In today's video, we're given two strings and we gotta see if they are an anagram or not. If they are, we're gonna return true. Now, what is an anagram? Two strings are an anagram if they have the same letters, but the order of the letters are different. So they should have the same letters, and as you can see, the same amount of repetitions. For example, here we have 3 A's and here we have 3 A's. But the order of the letters, the way the letters are structured is different. For example, here our first letter is A, but here our second letter is A. But because the letters and the number of repetitions that they have are the same, these two are an anagram, therefore we're going to return true. And why are we doing this? Well, because that's what LeetCode 242 valid anagram is asking us to do. As you can see, it says, given two strings S and T, return true if T is an anagram of S and false otherwise. All right, let's see how we can solve this. Our approach is gonna be really simple, and I'm gonna show you right now. The only thing that we need is gonna be basically a variable called countMap, and this is gonna be representing each letter that we have here and the number of repetition of each letter. And you're gonna see how this works because I'll visualize everything so you can see how it works with your own eyes, so you never forget. So let me just show you. We're gonna first loop through each letter that we have in our first word. So we're gonna be like, okay, the first letter is A. All right, does A exist here? Not really. So we're gonna add it to here and we have to give it a count. That count is representing the number of repetitions of the number of occurrences of A. So far we only have 1. So A is gonna be 1, like so. And this is saying so far in our loop, we've had A once. And then we're going to keep on moving forward. We're going to be like, okay, the current letter is N. Does N exist in our count map? Not really. So we're going to add it to it. And then we're going to be like, the count is 1. Then the next letter is going to be A. We're going to check if A exists here. Well, would you look at that? It does. So we're just going to increment the count. Now we know so far we have 2 occurrences of the letter A. And then we're going to move on forward. Now our letter is going to be G. We're going to be like, does G exist here? Not really. So we're just going to add it to it. And we're going to give it the count of 1. Then we're going to move on forward. We're going to have R. Let's check if R exists here. It doesn't. So we're just going to add it here. Then the next letter is going to be A again. We're going to be like, does A exist here? It does. So we're going to increment its count and we're going to move on forward. Then the next letter is going to be M. We're going to be like, does M exist here? Not really. So we're just going to add it here and give it the count of 1. And would you look at that? We're done with all of our letters. Now that we have our count map, this is basically telling us which letters we have in our first word and how many times were they repeated. Now that we have this, we're going to simply loop through this one here, each letter of our second word, like so. And we're gonna check if these letters exist here. If they don't, that means we don't have an anagram. Why? Well, because 2 words are anagrams if they have the same letters and the same amount of repetitions. If there's a letter that doesn't exist in one, that means they're not anagrams. So we're gonna be like, each time we're gonna be looping through these and we're gonna ask, does this exist here? If it doesn't, just return false because we know they're not anagrams. But if it does, find that letter and decrement its count, like so. And we're just gonna move on forward. And you're gonna see why we need to do this here, literally, in this round. We're gonna be like, do we have A? Well, yeah. So let's decrement the count of it, like so. And then we're gonna move on forward. This count here is telling us that we need to have 2 more A's to make sure that we have anagrams. So each time we're gonna be like, does this letter exist here? If it doesn't, that means it's not an anagram. And for example, if the number of repetitions of A here is 8 and this only has 3, we're going to realize that with this count because this count only allows us to have 3 A's because the first word had only 3 A's. So if this one has more, meaning if we reach a state where the count of this is going to be 0, but we still have A's here, we know that they're not an anagram. So in this round, we're going to be like, do we have G here? Well, yeah. And then we're going to just decrement it. Now we're going to move on forward. If we have another G here, if we check with this one, we know that the count of this is 0. That means we don't have an anagram because this one still has G's, but we were only allowed to have 1 G. Simple as that. Again, we're going to be like, does A exist here? Well, yeah. Is the count greater than 0? It is. So we're just going to decrement it. Simple as that. Then we're going to move on forward. We're going to be like, does R exist? And if it does, is the count greater than 0? Well, yeah. So we're going to just decrement it like so. Then we're gonna reach A again. We're gonna be like, does A exist? And is the count greater than 0? Well, yeah, so let's decrement it. Awesome. And then for our last letter, we're gonna be like, does M exist here? And is the count greater than 0? Well, yeah, so let's decrement it. And we're basically done. Now, because we didn't return false throughout our loop, we're gonna just return true. Simple as that. If they were not an anagram, we would have already returned false throughout our loop, because we always checked if there's a letter that does not exist here. If that was the case, we would return false, or if the count was not greater than 0. If it was also not greater than 0, we would just return false, but we didn't have that case. So that means we have an anagram and we're gonna return true at the end. Now let's code this in the simplest way possible. Alrighty, let's code this together. So the first thing that we need to do is to define our count map, just like we saw in the slides. And this is gonna be just a simple object in the beginning. And then we have to loop through each letter in our first word. So we're gonna say for let letter of S, which is basically our first word. Here we're gonna be like count map with the key of that letter. We're getting that letter inside of our count map. And here we have to say, we need to increment the number of occurrences of that letter. But what if the letter did not exist? Meaning it was the first time that we encountered that letter. In that case, we're gonna be like count map letter. If this exists, add 1 to it. But if it didn't exist, we're gonna add 1 to 0. So what this basically says is that if count map with the key of letter exists, get that and add 1 to it. If it doesn't exist, just default to this 0 and add 1 to it, and then that's gonna be equal to count map with the key of letter. Simple as that. So if the letter existed in our count map, we're gonna increment it. If not, we're gonna basically just initiate it with the count of 1, just like we saw in the slice. This is gonna be the only thing that we have in our first loop, and then we have to loop through our second word. We're gonna have something similar. We're gonna say for let letter of T, which is basically our second word, we're gonna be like, if we need to have our return false here. So we're gonna say if count map letter, basically with the key that we have, is equal to undefined, meaning it didn't exist in our count map, that means we have a letter that did not exist in our count map. In that case, we wanna return false. But this is not the only case that we wanna return false. We wanna also return false when we're gonna have an or, because we wanna add another condition. When count map at this key, basically at that letter, is equal to 0, but we still have another letter. That means the number of occurrences of each letter is not equal, so we don't have an anagram. Therefore, we wanna also return false. If that's not the case, the only thing we wanna do is to get that count of that letter and decrement it by 1. Simple as that. And if we don't return false here, we're gonna return true at the end. Now there's only one more thing. If S and T don't have the same length, that means there's no possible way they can be anagrams because they don't have the same length. So we're gonna say if S.length is not equal to T.length, just return false right away. And this is gonna be all of our code. Let me run this. I hope I have not made any typos. Let's see, moment of truth. Awesome, we got accepted. Let me submit this and see if we can actually pass all of the test cases. And we got accepted. That's awesome. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and keep on coding.